Why does every attempt to reach a final explanation of reality eventually collapse into further questions? This is not a failure unique to philosophy or religion. It is a recurring pattern across all domains of knowledge. Humans consistently seek definitive answers, stable truths, and closed explanations. We want a point at which inquiry ends and certainty begins. Yet this expectation repeatedly encounters contradiction. Science advances by refining theories, only to revise or replace them later. Philosophy resolves problems only to uncover deeper layers of inquiry beneath them. Even personal certainty about identity, beliefs, or values rarely remains stable across time. What once felt unquestionable often becomes provisional. This pattern suggests a deeper issue. Perhaps reality itself is not incomplete or poorly understood. Perhaps the demand for finality is the error. Ibn Arabi offers a framework that takes this possibility seriously. He argues that reality is structurally resistant to final definitions, not because truth is absent, but because reality itself is dynamic. This refusal of final answers is not chaos or relativism. It follows a coherent metaphysical and cognitive principle that can be examined rationally. From a psychological perspective, the modern human condition is marked by an intense discomfort with uncertainty. Chronic stress often arises from unresolved meaning. Anxiety increases when questions remain open. In response, many individuals develop over-attachment to rigid belief systems, whether ideological, religious, or scientific. Several cognitive mechanisms explain this pattern. The need for cognitive closure describes a preference for definite answers and an aversion to ambiguity. Uncertainty, intolerance amplifies anxiety responses when outcomes or meanings are unclear. Binary cognition simplifies complex systems into oppositional categories, reducing mental effort but distorting reality. These tendencies produce recognizable symptoms. Ideological extremism grows when ambiguity is rejected. Overconfidence emerges when provisional conclusions are mistaken for final truth, often followed by collapse when those conclusions fail. Identity instability results when rigid self-definitions cannot adapt to change. Neurologically, this makes sense. The brain evolved to predict and categorize in order to reduce metabolic load. Closure conserves energy. However, reality operates as an open system, constantly generating new conditions. The conflict arises because a closure-seeking brain confronts a non-closed world. What is needed is a framework that explains why final answers consistently fail, without denying the existence of truth itself. Ibn Arabi is often approached as a poetic mystic, but this characterization obscures his intellectual rigor. He was, first and foremost, a metaphysician of being and a systematic analyst of perception and knowledge. His work addresses how reality appears, how it is known, and why knowledge behaves the way it does. Importantly, he was not anti-logic, nor did he promote vagueness or irrationality. On the contrary, he was deeply attentive to the limits and functions of reason. His central principle is clear. Reality is infinite in its manifestations, but singular in its source. What appears contradictory at the level of understanding is unified at the level of existence. From this perspective, final answers fail not because truth is inaccessible, but because reality is dynamic rather than static. Ibn Arabi was a pre-modern thinker addressing what are now postmodern problems: fragmentation of meaning, observer dependence, and epistemic instability. His framework aligns closely with modern ideas such as open systems theory, constructivist epistemology, and observer-dependent cognition. One of Ibn Arabi's foundational ideas is that reality continuously discloses itself through forms. Existence does not present itself once and for all. It appears through ever-renewed configurations. This requires a critical distinction between reality itself and its appearances. In cognitive terms, this mirrors the limits of perceptual bandwidth. The brain does not perceive reality in totality. It samples, filters, and constructs workable models based on limited input. No perception is exhaustive, and no interpretation is final. A simple real-world example illustrates this. The same event, a public crisis, a personal failure, a social change, can be interpreted as a threat by one person and as an opportunity by another. The event itself is not contradictory. The interpretations arise from different perceptual frameworks shaped by culture, experience, and cognitive bias. From this perspective, final answers fail because perception is partial by design. This is not a defect in human cognition, but a functional constraint. Ibn Arabi's insight reframes knowledge as inherently provisional. Human understanding is always incomplete, not because it is flawed, but because reality exceeds any single frame of reference. Ibn Arabi uses the concept of tajalli, or self-disclosure, to explain why reality resists final answers. Tajalli refers to the continuous revelation of reality in ever-changing forms. What is known today is not invalidated tomorrow, but it is recontextualized. Final answers are impossible because the object of knowing never stabilizes. Reality is not a fixed entity waiting to be captured by a definition. It is an ongoing process. From a scientific standpoint, this resembles dynamic systems in physics and biology, where behavior emerges through continuous feedback loops rather than static states. Personal identity provides a clear example. An individual remains recognizably the same person over time, yet beliefs, values, and self-concepts evolve. Memory continuity does not imply identity stasis. Change does not negate truth. It expresses it across time. A common misconception is that if truth changes, it must be unreliable. Ibn Arabi rejects this. For him, truth unfolds rather than concludes. Stability is not achieved through finality, but through coherence across transformation. Another key element of Ibn Arabi's epistemology is his view of knowledge as relational rather than possessive. Knowledge is not something one owns or accumulates permanently. It is something that arises through interaction between the knower and what is known. This contrasts sharply with modern assumptions that treat knowledge as a fixed asset. From a neuroscientific perspective, contemporary predictive processing models support Ibn Arabi's view. The brain continuously updates its models of reality through error correction. Knowledge is maintained through adjustment, not storage. Expertise in any field illustrates this principle. A skilled physician, scientist, or engineer does not rely on static information alone. Expertise requires continuous recalibration in response to new data and changing conditions. Final answers would make expertise obsolete. The insight here is crucial. Final answers imply ownership of truth. Ibn Arabi identifies this as a category error. Truth is not an object to be possessed, but a relationship to be maintained. To explain how knowledge can function without closure, Ibn Arabi introduces the concept of barzakh as an epistemic space. Barzakh exists between certainty and ignorance, allowing understanding without final resolution. Psychologically, this corresponds to cognitive flexibility and tolerance for ambiguity. Individuals capable of operating in this space can hold competing interpretations without anxiety-driven collapse. They do not rush toward premature closure. Ethical dilemmas provide a clear example. Many moral situations do not admit absolute solutions. Wisdom lies not in forcing a definitive answer, but in sustaining reflective openness while acting responsibly. In this framework, knowing without closure is not weakness. It is a higher-order cognitive capacity. Barzak allows engagement with reality as it is, complex, layered, and evolving. Ibn Arabi warned that fixation on finality hardens perception. When individuals cling to definitive answers, they become defensive against new information. Learning capacity decreases because revision is experienced as threat. Psychological research confirms this. Rigid belief systems correlate with increased defensiveness and reduced adaptability. Importantly, the absence of final answers does not mean the absence of truth. This is a common misunderstanding. The critical distinction is between truth as a product and truth as a process. Treating truth as a finished product leads to stagnation. Treating it as a process allows growth. Mental suffering increases when reality is forced into static models. Anxiety often arises not from uncertainty itself, but from resistance to uncertainty. Ibn Arabi's framework reduces this suffering by aligning cognition with the open nature of reality. Applied practically, Ibn Arabi's insights suggest several cognitive shifts. One is replacing certainty-seeking with inquiry. Another is observing how beliefs form, rather than identifying with them absolutely. From a neuroscientific perspective, this approach reduces amygdala activation under uncertainty and improves emotional regulation. Flexibility in belief processing supports resilience. These principles apply across contexts. In science, they encourage hypothesis revision rather than dogma. In religious dialogue, they allow commitment without absolutism. In personal identity development, they support continuity without rigidity. Treating beliefs as working models rather than final truths increases psychological coherence. The result is not confusion, but adaptability, a stable openness to reality as it unfolds. The central insight of Ibn Arabi's philosophy is that reality refuses final answers because it is alive, not incomplete. The absence of finality is not a flaw to be corrected, but a feature to be understood. When frustration arises from unanswered questions, it often reflects a mismatch between expectation and reality. Certainty closes perception. Openness sustains understanding. Ibn Arabi offers a disciplined way to live inside unanswered reality, without confusion, relativism, or despair. His framework does not eliminate truth. It situates truth within a dynamic relationship between reality and perception, one that continues to unfold rather than conclude.